host, Matthew Couture, and this is episode 9. On this week's episode, I have with me Jason Holliday from the Harvest Holliday Podcast. Now, if you don't know who Jason is or what his podcast is, you should go check him out on Spotify, any podcast platform. Just search Harvest Holiday Podcast. You can look up the same name on Instagram. He's on there too. And basically, Jason is a Ohio Midwest whitetail hunter from, that's what he did growing up. And he's documented his journey and progression from doing that to going out west in Colorado and hunting for elk. We kind of talked through that, what it takes to do on the podcast side of things, and really kind of got cut a little too short due to some errors on my end of not realizing that the day we recorded this, Zoom switched their terms of it used to be like 1-and-1. You could record for as long as you want. So there's a little bit of a gap in the middle where you might get a little confusing. So we had to record 2 sessions, and I'm going to edit it together. But it was a great podcast. I'm going to have Jason back on. We're going to go over more of the elk side of things and his journey through that. Because, like I said, just kind of got cut short in time. But still a great episode. Loved having Jason on. So without further ado, I give you episode 9 with Jason Holliday. All right, thank you, Jason, for joining me on the Forging Roots podcast. It's an honor to have you. And why don't you go ahead and just introduce yourself to the people in the audience that might not know you and who you are and what you're about.
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me on, man. I know we've been kind of back and forth here for a few weeks and everything, so it's good to finally connect. So I'm Jason Holliday. I'm the host of the Harvest Holiday Podcast. Holiday is spelled with 2 L's, by the way. Yes. I'll say that like 4 more times. That's just how I spell my last name. I'm born and raised here in Northwestern Ohio. Lifelong hunter, bow hunter. Kind of grew up in a hunting and outdoor family. I always tell the story I was very blessed to be able to hop off the school bus as a kid, run through the front door with my school clothes and out the back door, in my camo. And, I'm 45 years old. So I grew up in kind of an interesting era where, hunting with a compound bow itself was just starting to really get popular. And then the evolution of hunting media, where it went from print media to, getting these VHS tapes and, a couple of shows on television, like Michigan Out of Doors. I'm sure you're familiar with Michigan Out of Doors. Like that was like the only thing to watch and things like that. So I kind of grew up in that era. And as time progressed, obviously, kind of blended into the age of the outdoor channel and things like that. But aside from that, I've just always been enamored with the outdoors, having an older brother and a dad, that were into the outdoors. I didn't have to get drug out there. Like no one had to force me out. It was more like they had to force me back in, if anything, So like I said, I was very fortunate to grow up with a family that was into hunting. And I got bit by the bug early, especially when it came to deer hunting. I always followed my dad and brother out in the woods when they would rabbit hunt and things like that. But when I was around 10 or 11 years old, I started shooting a bow and arrow for the first time. And I found a video. My dad actually bought it. It was called Hunting the Rut with Ben Lee and Don Bell. And I was just hooked right then and there watching this video. These guys, they were actually hunting in Michigan. This is, again, back in the mid 80s. And they were building mock scrapes and like really early on before anybody knew anything about scents and calls. So, and that's what I watched over and over again. Before school, I'd watch a little bit and I'd watch the rest on the way home. And I couldn't wait to get out in the woods, with a bow and arrow. And like I said, it bit me hard. When most kids at that age were sleeping in and watching cartoons, I was, walking out in the woods without a flashlight, walking out on 4-wheeler trails in the dark to get to my ground blind or my tree stand. And, just always loved it. And it's never, ever, ever let up to the point where it's any less exciting than it was 30 years ago. We talk with some people today, like, if social media went away, I would still be this intense about it. I would still be prepping and thinking about it. And just, it's just,
right.
It's just the social media for me is just a way to connect with other people. And then having the podcast also is just a way to connect with people and share stories and things like that. And hopefully maybe educate a little bit as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, that's kind of like you said, the social media, the podcasting. Had it not been for that, this is something I'm the complete opposite. I did not grow up in a like my not that hunting wasn't accepted, but my dad's just not a hunter or fisher really. He did some fishing a little bit as a kid, but I've still to this day I've never been fishing. I've only been on the one hunt that I did last year, but if it wasn't for podcasts and people getting out there and being able to share that, where I'm the same way. I do enjoy the outdoors. There's something about it where to me that is like the most peaceful place to be, is to just sit
Yeah.
in the woods and going out there and learning. I mean, just in the last year and a half, coming up on 2 years of just soaking up all this information. And like I said, last year did my first sit for whitetail. I only got one sit in, but my whole thing was, even if I just sit out here, and I didn't do the whole day, it was basically morning. I was like, if I sit out here, like as long as I see at least one thing, like that will have made the whole experience for the first time
Yeah.
worth it. Also knowing that if I didn't see anything, that still wasn't going to make or break it. And I kid you not, I was sitting there up in the tree stand I got in at like 6 o'clock, sitting there and I just sit and listen. I keep, man, I swear to God, these squirrels or mice or something out there sounded 5 times bigger than what they
Oh
actually were.
yeah.
Cause I kept hearing, I'm like, oh, maybe this is it. This is my chance. Something's going to come out. And sure enough, I'm like, oh, it's a squirrel again, or, oh, it's just these birds. Because where I was sitting there is like a little creek, and kept hearing the ducks and stuff getting in there, dive bombing and playing around. About 10 o'clock, I was supposed to be meeting up with my girlfriend later on that day. And I'm like, well, I'm going to at least shoot her a text, let her know, like, hey, didn't get anything this morning, and we'll meet up. As soon as I'd send the text, I put the phone back in my pocket. I look up and there's this 6-point just sitting there like 25 yards. I'm like,
Yeah.
how in the hell did something that big just sneak up on me? And he's quartered to me behind this tree. And like there's a tree line and then open field. I needed him to just take one step forward, and I had a nice chip shot, 25 yards, but sure enough, take a step back into the woods and it just wasn't a clean enough shot. So I had to just sit there and watch him walk away. But still, at the end of the day, like during the whole thing, was super calm. I now understand what they mean by buck fever, because like 5 minutes later, I'm just sitting in the stand, just shaking like crazy, like
Yeah.
the adrenaline rush. And yeah, definitely bit the bug on that. And even listen, like that's just me for whitetail. And I know on your podcast, you've talked about your first time going elk hunting and having that rush. And you care to kind of explain about the elk hunting versus whitetail and when those kind of, I guess, collided?
Yeah. Yeah. So, going back to kind of the beginning, like I said, I've always, growing up as a kid, getting like Bow Hunter magazine and all these things, I would always thumb through and read all the articles, even the ones that were like Western big game hunting, which for me, as a kid wasn't exactly, I don't want to say I didn't like it, but I didn't relate because I'm from Ohio. So to read an article about, Colorado elk or whatever, I just see the pictures and be like, man, that looks cool. I can remember reading some articles with, like Chuck Adams or, Dwight Shue, these Western guys that were like, the giants back then, talking about their Western hunts. And it's just like, it was the adventure aspect that really got me. It was the sleeping in a tent, being in the mountains and bugling bulls, and like that part of like the romanticism around that type of hunting. It was like, yeah, it'd be cool to do someday. And then I would just kind of go about my business, because for me and a lot of guys, up until just recently, it just seemed like that type of hunting for a guy like me was, you had to have a guide, and it cost a lot of money. I didn't realize until a half a dozen years ago, from a good close friend of mine, that was like, no, dude, we buy over the counter tags at like Walmart, and we just park the van and we hike out into the woods on like public land. I'm like, wait, stop. So let me get this straight. You just buy tags and you can like park along, like you can do that. Like, yeah, it's like millions of acres of public land. And we just hike with camp on our backs, and we go up in the mountains and we hunt elk. And I'm like, without a guide? He's like, yeah, it's just, you just figure it out on your own. I'm like, what? You know what I mean? Like
that's possible.
Yeah. And I really never gave it a thought. And I should probably back up a little bit, because when I was in my 30s, I picked up another hobby that I'd wanted to do since I was a child, which is racing four-wheelers. I started racing off-road, and that took up all my time, as a young adult in my 30s. So I basically just kind of stuck to the whitetail side of things. And what really kicked it off was my 40th birthday. My now wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, took me to Colorado for the very first time. We went out to Rocky Mountain National Park, and then we zoomed up to Yellowstone. And this is in October.
Okay.
And so I ended up seeing, I'll speed the story up a little bit, but we're driving out in the Lamar Valley, which is kind of on the eastern end of the park, a big open prairie-like part of Yellowstone. And it's mid-October, and there was nobody out in the park. It's like the last hour or so of daylight. We're coming around this windy road, and up this lone bull comes up and over the edge, and he starts feeding alongside the road. And we're the only cars out. There's nobody else out there. I'm like, stop the car. And so we kind of pulled over a little bit and gave him a space, and he's just like munching on grass. And I took some pictures, and I could smell this bull, and he just smelled terrible, right? Just like piss and mud and shit and all this stuff, And I'm just like, that's incredible. My wife's like, roll up the window. He stinks. And I'm like, and it was like this moment of extreme clarity. And this is 2016. And I'm like, I have to go on an elk hunt. Like, I had just seen the mountains for the first time. We actually came out 6 months before to Rocky Mountain National Park to visit a friend. But ironically, the weather was so bad, I couldn't even see the Rocky Mountains that weekend that I was there. The clouds were so low, I couldn't see. We were in the mountains and still couldn't see them. So we came back in October and, went up and saw Rocky Mountain National Park and did Trail Ridge Road and got to see mountains for the first time. And it was like, like I said, it was like an epiphany. It was like an awakening, like something snapped on my 40th birthday. And I was like, dude, you have to do this. Like, I almost like turned the switch off from being this hardcore, eat, sleep, breathe racing and off-road racing, and everything's got to be about racing, to I'm done racing now. I just want to go out west. And I didn't know anything. I didn't know anyone. Everyone that I was following on social media was in the racing industry and not the hunting industry. I followed very few people in the hunting industry. So I'm like, I don't even know who to follow. I don't even know where to start, so that's kind of where the journey started for me, was just like, listening to podcasts, honestly. Yep. That's kind of what catapulted me, much like you. I found a video on Facebook. I think it was called The Tribute, and it was by a company called the Mountain Project. And it was a hunt with Cameron Haynes and his late friend, Roy Roth. And I didn't know who Cameron Haynes was. I just saw this, like a little snippet of this video. I'm like, this looks rad. And it's in a moose hunt in Alaska. I'm like, I don't know who this Cameron Haynes guy is, but this dude is like a savage, right?
Yep.
And kills this moose. It's an awesome video. And unfortunately, Roy passed not long after that. And so I started like soaking up everything I could about Cameron Haynes, which led me to Joe Rogan, right?
Yep.
And I knew who Joe Rogan was. I knew he had a podcast, but I really wasn't into podcasts at the time. So I'm like, I got to find everything about Cam. So I start listening to Joe Rogan podcast. Well, sure enough, Joe hunts too. And Joe has other hunting guests that are on the podcast, Steve Ranella, Remy Warren, and just all of these other hunter types. And it's like, oh man, now I'm all about Remy Warren. Now I'm all about Steve Ranella and Meat Eater and all these different things. And it just starts,
it trickle effects like crazy.
Yeah, big time. It's like a spider web. And which was great, because now I'm reading articles, I'm listening to other podcasts. I find Brian Call, which led me to Aaron Snyder of Kafaru, which led me to Kafaru, because it's like I'm starting to build like, gear and like what do you buy and who's wearing what, and like really focused on that kind of thing. And going down the YouTube rabbit holes of like, I just opened up the search bar and I would just type the letter O, and it would always come up like OTC DIY archery elk hunt Colorado. You know what I mean? So right. I'm like watching all these, DIY videos and stuff like that and trying to get information there. And the whole time I'm doing this, I can't even afford to go out there at this point. 2016, 2017, I had like massive debt that I needed to get rid of, but it's like, I'm going on this hunt but I couldn't justify like racking up a credit card to go on this hunt. I needed to do things the right way. So it literally took me it took me till 2019 to actually go on that elk hunt. So it took me a couple of years to get myself into a place where I felt like I can afford to kind of go on this trip. And I made a lot of mistakes along the way in terms of what I spent on that first trip as far as gear and things like that. And we can talk about that too if you like. And learn those lessons along the way. I feel I could have done that first trip a lot cheaper. But again, and it was kind of what catapulted me into doing the podcast, because it's like, all right, I got to share not just the hunt with people, but there's like a lot of subcategories, that I've learned to getting into this. And I know we're kind of going all over the place, and you asked me about the difference between the whitetail and the elk thing. I'm really passionate about them both, honestly. I really, really am. Like, I'm a whitetail guy at heart. I always will be. There's something special about, a cold, crisp, late October morning, when the leaves are like peak, and there's like that smell in the air of like dead leaves, and then there's the mud from the swamp and the fresh cut corn. And, like you said, that 6-pointer just melts out of nowhere.
It's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. And I had that, it's funny when you're talking about that, I had that same experience this year. My two good friends and we've been doing this little deer camp for the last few years. My dad actually passed away in 2018, and a year later, my mom sold the farm that we hunted on for my whole entire life, because I wasn't a public land guy up until then. Didn't need to be, right? I had private property to hunt, and another neighbor let me hunt his property. And, other than the couple of times with them, I didn't need to. Anyway, these guys invited me along. Fast forward from 2018 to 2021, which is just last year. Day one of deer camp, I shot this little, I'm looking at him right now, it's a little fork horn, and it was October 27th, and it was, like 9:30 in the morning. I'd been seeing deer all over the place, just having like the quintessential day. Like, it was gunmetal gray, dark, heavy clouds, right at about that 30-degree mark where it was cold, but not too cold. And it just felt like the rut was like seconds away from kicking off. There were fresh scrapes everywhere. I was in that area like a few days prior. And the reason I hung that stand in this little tree line was because it was like scrape, 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 scrape. It's like, you'd be fooled not to just like throw a setup in here just to see what happens, just for funsies or whatever. And out popped this little fork horn, and I'm like, I'm taking it, because I hadn't shot a buck. This was the first buck that I'd actually killed since my mom sold the property. So it was actually the first buck I'd ever killed on public land ever. Right.
Okay. Yep.
So I've got a couple of nice bucks on the wall. You can probably see them over there. But like this little guy, like, it just filled like the goals that I had at the time, which were kill a buck during deer camp, or 3-man, or just kill a deer during deer camp, period. Didn't have to, if it was a doe, I was filling a tag. There was a button buck at like 65 yards, and I'm like, like an hour earlier. So this guy came in at like 12 yards, and I smoked him. But it's like, cool, I killed my first buck on public land. And I killed a buck, or just a deer, period, during, our 3-man deer camp. And like, that to me meant more than antlers or anything like that. And so that's just kind of how I am in a nutshell. And like I said, I know we're going super far off the path of elk versus whitetails, but it just, I mean, to kind of frame up how I am and how I think, like I said, at 45 years old, I've kind of changed my thinking a little bit. Not that being a strict trophy hunter is a bad thing. But I had different goals this year, and I felt so fulfilled by filling a tag with what I wanted versus what I think Instagram wanted me to shoot. I saw a lot of guys saying, well, he wasn't my shooter buck, or he wasn't my target buck this year, but he was brought. It's like, why are you making excuses? Just kill the deer and put a tag on it, throw it in the freezer. You don't have, we've gotten into this thing this year, and it seemed to be a trend last year where guys were saying, well, this wasn't the buck I was after, but it's like, so you're basically just saying you settled. Like, either commit or don't, and I did that for a long time. I went almost 11 years without killing a buck. And it wasn't for lack of not trying. I passed up on tons of bucks because I had this high standard from the other bucks that are hanging above me. I had to keep up with that caliber. And to be honest, Matt, looking back, I don't want to say I regret passing up on the bucks that I did, because it kept me out in the field longer. I was able to interact with smaller bucks and just kind of watch deer be deer. And I got an incredible education from passing up on a lot of bucks. But at the same time, I look back at some of the pictures from trail cameras. I'm like, why did I pass that guy? You know what I mean? So like I said, at this age and where I'm at in life, I've come to the realization that it's like, whatever floats your boat, and to not let anybody dictate, what you should be doing based on what other people are thinking, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Yep. So yeah, absolutely crazy about it. And then, the elk thing, that started in 2019. And I guess we can dive however you want to dive into that, but that's, the first trip was in 2019. I finally had saved up and went out to hunt. And that's, like I said, that's the next chapter we can probably kind of dive into if you have like a specific area you want to go, because there's a lot of different topics.
Yeah, there's a lot of rabbit holes to go down there, because like I said, I was telling you earlier, I've been listening to kind of backing up from 2019 and all that. And what's this? Meeting will end in 10 minutes.
The hell it will.
Yeah. Oh gosh. Okay, well, we got some more editing to do on the podcast now. Okay, I think we got this figured out for the most part. So where we left off, we were talking about the elk and all that, and like you were saying on there and talking about all the social media, and for me that was, like I said before, how I got into all this and kind of those rabbit holes that you go down, because I didn't follow any hunting people up until probably about 2019, 2020. And I was following back in 2016 Demolition Ranch, which is a YouTube guy. And I was like, okay, followed him, liked his stuff. And then he had these guys from Black Rifle Coffee. I'm like, well, what's this? And they have this podcast that he was on. So I listened to the podcast he was on, but I was like, oh, these guys are pretty funny. Went down that rabbit hole and just started listening to all the podcasts they had on there where they talk about Joe Rogan. And I heard the same as you. I heard the name Joe Rogan and didn't really, and even at that point still didn't know much. And then they had on John Barklow on the podcast. And I was like, okay, who's this guy? What's Sitka? I have never heard of that before. What do you talk? Like, this is supposed to be the best of the best hunting clothing. And this, like I said, that rabbit hole and seeing, I was like, okay, they do these elk hunts, and then hearing John Dudley, who's this John Dudley guy? He's supposed to be a good archery shooter and hunter. And I watched also another one of their YouTube videos, and like you said, that romanticism of the elk hunt, that definitely, like, I know I'm still a couple of years out from saving for that, and that's kind of one thing too for me, of like knowing how tough the mountains can be, not only like mentally but physically. And that's given me like that boost of like, okay, I really need to kick it in gear and get in shape. And especially since graduating and don't need to necessarily be working out like I was in football, but that's kind of given me that motivation of having something to work out other than just look good, feel good, I know that's something that you take into consideration. What are the things that you do to prepare physically to go up in the mountains, and mentally too, for that matter?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. To kind of go back a little bit, like when I got into this, much like you, like we talked about a little bit before, there was so many rabbit holes I could go down. And I think what got me in trouble was the fact that I was getting too wrapped up in gear and clothing, like you talked about Sitka and things like that. And it's like, and what boots do I wear? What pack do I have to have? And what backcountry food do I need to eat? And what shelter do I need to buy? I want to have a floorless shelter, because that's what my influencers are using. They're using a floorless shelter with a stove, and that looks rad. I got to have that. And I got to have the best of all this gear. I got to have all the Sitka and, rack up an incredible bill. And come to find out, the mountains, I have this saying where it's like the mountains don't care what you're wearing. Like they don't care if you're wearing $1,000 worth of Sitka or $100 worth of Walmart camo. It'll beat your ass either way. It just does not matter. So the point of that is mental toughness, and preparedness trumps all, and physical too. Obviously you want to train and work out. I'm in the gym 6 days a week. I'm trying my best to maintain a good diet. My wife and I think we do pretty well. We binge just like everyone else, and we enjoy the foods and the drinks that we like. Sometimes a little too much. We get off track, and we'll go, instead of having a cheat weekend, it turns into like a cheat month. You know what I mean? It's okay, time to bring it around. But I think the important thing when it comes to training for a hunt is, diets are a short-term thing. When you diet, it's a short term. You're eliminating carbs for a couple of weeks, or you're eliminating pizza for a month, or you're not going to drink alcohol for a month, or you're just going to do all these crazy things for like a month. It's short term. Get your body reset, and then get into just a healthy lifestyle where you're incorporating good, clean foods, but you're rewarding yourself with that cheat meal on like a Sunday or Friday or whatever, and just kind of balancing that out so you don't, because we love to eat food, right? We love to eat. We love to look forward to that fun meal on like a Friday night pizza or whatever. And that's fine. But I think for me, I always try to maintain, like, what gets me out of bed is knowing like September's coming, and the mountains are extraordinarily painful. And it's not all the mountains. I shouldn't say that, because there are some areas in Colorado specifically that, while not a walk in the park, are generally not as steep as some of the areas that I'm hunting now. This is I've been to 3 different areas of the state, and the one I'm hunting currently is like arguably one of the steepest areas in the entire state of Colorado. And, we're talking 40 plus degree slopes sometimes. So you're literally like leaning out and touching the mountain. That's how steep. And I'm not exaggerating to sound like a tough guy or anything, because I've even questioned my own sanity as to why I want to go back. So to have like that mindset of, okay, like you said, like working out for some people is just like looking good in a t-shirt, working on your biceps to look good for the old lady or whatever. And that's fine, but that's not going to help you out in the mountains. Case in point, last year we went on a scouting trip, my nephew and I, for prepping for my 3rd year of elk hunting. So by now I should be a professional, elk hunter. And so we go out, I fly out to Denver from Ohio, and I meet him, and we go down to this unit, and we hike a trail to get to where we need to go. And then we hike off trail. And then once we get off trail, it's just nothing but blow down. And when I say blow down, there was a fire, a forest fire, a wildfire in this area many years ago. So it's literally like someone dumped a 5-gallon bucket full of matchsticks on the side of the mountain, and every 10 feet you're climbing over telephone pole sized dead trees, and they're all burnt. So they're all black. Everything's black. You touch everything, it's black all over the place. And it's very steep on top of that. So it's not like you're just walking across a football field and stepping over trees. You're going up, and you're side hilling, and your ankles and your feet are twisting in a way that you're not used to. You're using muscles in your shins and in your calves that don't get worked unless you're in steep terrain. Okay. And prior to this, I was going to the gym a few days a week. I love road biking. So I'm on a bicycle. In fact, just before we started this podcast, I just got done with, I just busted out a quick 12 miles, you know what I mean? And just to get the cardio up and burn a few calories. And I thought, okay, this is all I need to do. And to be quite honest, up until that scouting trip, I would walk right past the Stair Climber. I maybe hit it a couple of times a week, just to get a few floors in. Same way with the leg extensions and the leg press and squats. Like, I don't want to do squats. Nobody likes to do leg day. That's why there's that joke, like, don't skip leg day, bro. Like, because everybody just wants to work on guns. They're flexing in front of the mirror. Nobody's looking at their quads. You know what I mean? Nobody's doing squats, because squats are painful. Lunges are painful. But when I got out there, I realized like that's where like my cardio was good. Like breathing
Mm-hmm.
wise, my lungs were like, what's wrong with the rest of you, dude? You know what I mean? But my legs were like, in serious need of help. So my nephew gave me some simple stuff to work on, which consisted of basically, and you want to start out light. You don't want to just go grabbing super heavy weight, but I would say, start out with like 10 or 15 pounds in each hand, and then just do step ups on, if there's like the weight bench, take the weight bench one to yourself, is what I usually do. And then just right leg down, and then left leg up and then down, and right leg back up, just step until you can't hang out anymore. Your lungs are on fire, and now you've got this weight that you're carrying. And then you want to incrementally get to a point where, before my shoulder injury, it was like a 40 and a 40, in each hand, until I couldn't take it anymore. And I just like mentally put myself in the mountains when I'm doing that, and I just try to
Mm-hmm.
go as long as I can. Most days it's usually like a 30-pound dumbbell in each hand, which, after about 60 seconds, I'm smoked, and then I'll go into push-ups or something like that. So I'm always kind of trying to think about like that weight, and obviously, rucking with an actual pack on, now that it's getting nice out, I'll throw between 30 and 50 pounds in my pack and
Mm-hmm.
just go for a hike. It's pretty flat here where I live, so I have to get creative. The one metro park I go to, there's a lot of park benches, so I'll do step ups on every single park bench that I
Okay.
pass. When I get to a park bench, I do step ups until I can't. I don't just
Yeah.
do 20. I just go until I can't. And I'll look at the heart rate monitor and be like, all right, 180. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Because the elevation up there, at 10,000 feet, which is usually where I'm at, is between 10 and 12,000 most of the time. Um, that's something a lot of people aren't prepared for, is that elevation. You could be, the cardio king here at 900 feet, and then get out to like 10,800 feet and just be gasping for air. So there does definitely has to be like that cardio balance. But having strong legs, strong back is critical. So I guess in a nutshell, I would focus on, if you're going to get a routine that's like mountain specific, I would definitely like, bite the bullet and start doing those leg exercises. And it helped me from July when we did our scouting trip. When I came back in September, I spent from, after 4th of July weekend, I came home and was like, okay, I'm going to do everything he said. I'm going to start incorporating, and I do weighted
Mm-hmm.
everything. Like I don't just do lunges. There's a 25 pound or a 35-pound dumbbell in each hand when I'm doing lunges, when I'm doing squats, anything that has to do with me standing up. There's always some kind of weight, whether it be like a 45-pound dumbbell behind my head or whatever. There's always some kind of, weight. And then the stair climber, like I don't walk past the stair climber anymore. Like I'll stay on it for 30 minutes,
Mm-hmm.
and I keep increasing those levels. And now I'm to a point where we're getting closer to the season. So I'll start wearing a weighted pack on the stair climber. And an interesting thing too about that, just for a nugget of information, last year at this time, I'll show a little bit of humility here. Last year at this time, when I was doing like leg curls, the most I could do with both legs, doing the leg curl machine, was about 50 pounds. I could do 50 pounds about 10 times, and it was like, whew, legs are on fire.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's 100. Okay. Probably 110 if I wanted to push it, but I can get a good workout with 100-pound leg curls, 100-pound leg extensions. But that took time to build up,
Right.
50s to 60s and so on. The stair climber was the same way. I could do about 40 floors and I was done. Like done. Like get me off this thing, I'm done. Now 40 floors is kind of a warm up, and
Oh
now
yeah.
I'm not getting off until I'm doing about 200. You know what I mean? Because I know we're going to camp at, say, 8,500 feet, and where I need to get to is about 11.6. You know what I mean? So
Right.
we're gonna gain in this one mountain, this one area, from where we start or climb in the morning. It will be at about 9,000 foot, and then we'll have to climb all the way up to get above the elk in the afternoon. So the thermals carry up once the sun starts to rise and gets warm. So we'll want to be above those elk. So, I'm going to have to do 3,000 feet at,
Yeah.
at like a 40-degree slope. I mean, it's like I said, it's ridiculous terrain. Like not every place in Colorado is like that. But I've always got that in mind of what's coming down the road. So it not only motivates me to get to the gym, but it helps me focus on like specific type of training. So I think people need to maximize what they're doing in the gym if that's what they're wanting to work on.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of like you said, there's in Detroit area, that's where I'm from, and it's pretty flat in this area for the most part. You can start to drive a couple hours, but that's just like a day to day, not practical always. But one thing I do like, I don't know if you ever been to like Silver Lake Dunes or anything
Oh
like
yeah.
that. And yeah, that stuff. There's a river trip that me and my buddies always do on Pine River, which is like Baldwin area.
Yeah. Yep.
And there's this little bend towards the like last little stint of our 4 hour, 4 hours if you do it just straight up, but we take the whole day, raft, picnic, kayak, do all that stuff. And but there's this giant dune, and I tell you what, man, I wish I had one of those closer, because that is,
Yeah.
I've never been to the mountains, but that stuff, that's one step up, 3 steps down every time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
My
it's
wife
just
and I
that
actually did
incline's
that.
crazy.
Yeah. We went to, was it Big Bear or Sleeping Bear?
Sleeping Bear Dunes. Yep.
And we climbed the dunes there, and it was, yeah, it's ridiculous. Like
It's
walking in
crazy.
sand is an incredible workout. But if you don't have anything like that, you have to get creative. You can't just be like, well, it's flat where I live. Well, it's flat where I live too.
Yep.
But, like I said, lunges, get a box that's 36 inches high and make it to where it's kind of challenging to step up on it,
Right.
and then start incrementally, do it without weights at first. And then throw, like I said, some people like, oh, I got to put like 75 pounds. No, you don't. Like 50 should be kind of the max, honestly.
Mhm.
Because you're just going to injure yourself during a workout. Save that for like when you're carrying an elk quarter. I typically don't go much over 50 pounds. Usually it's right around 40, to be perfectly honest. My pack, now that I can kind of get it dialed in with my bow and everything on my pack, without water, which is like an Nalgene bottle full of water, no bladder. I'm looking at like 40, 45 pounds, give or take. So that's kind of what I train with. So when I throw my pack on, at the trailhead, it just feels like it normally does any day of the week. You know what I mean? So I'm used to that weight specifically. Sometimes I go a little bit over that. So if it's 55 pounds and 45 pounds feels like nothing, you know what I mean? It's a weird how just a couple pounds can make a difference. But again, going back to what I said, I think, for guys that want to train for out west, if you've got no mountain to train on, obviously ramp up the cardio, but definitely don't be skipping the leg day. Find a stair climber, find a park bench, something you can climb up, something you can climb down. If there's a small hill, walk sideways on it, get that feel of using those muscles and the muscles in your ankles to stabilize your body as you're side hilling, and just start to really like just anything you can find to put yourself in that type of environment. Because either way, guys get so focused on that. And the thing I've learned is, I don't want to say it doesn't matter, but it doesn't. Like, you're going to go out there and just get throttled. But to prepare yourself the best you can, you still need to give yourself a really good advantage. But again, the mountains are still going to show you that, like, yeah, you got a long way to go, kid, but thanks for playing. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
But yeah, it's definitely not an excuse to not train anyways, because you just should. Everyone should just have a good diet, and everyone should train and do the best they can every day to try to get, some kind of physical activity in. So absolutely.
Yeah, and just talking to you about like the training, the elk hunting, the whitetail hunting, you obviously have gained a lot of knowledge, and because of that, have done the podcast that you do. Kind of just, I'm curious for myself, but like, what was the driving force behind you saying, okay, you know what, like, I've been learning this stuff and I want to do this podcast? What was that driving force into doing it?
That's a good question. I actually just did a podcast this morning with one of the people that kind of inspired me to take the leap. His name is Bo Martonic. He's got a podcast called the East Meets West Hunt podcast. He's a Pennsylvania native. I don't even think he's 30 years old. And he kind of took the leap and got into it. And when I listened to his first podcast, he was talking to Brian Call from the Gritty podcast and talking about his journey into it. And it really, what it boils down to was, I could think about this or talk about this, or I could just do it. And I talked about it long enough. I think in 2016 or 17, I was listening to all these guys and I'm like, yeah, man, I could do this. I'm a talker, I like talking to people, I like telling stories. I mean, that's just who we are as hunters. We like to, I think it's just in our DNA to like get back from, a hunt and get back to camp and like tell the story and talk to your buddy and what'd you see. And, and now you just hit a record button and just kind of do the same thing. And,
Mm-hmm.
I had all these fears, like a lot of guys, and maybe you did too, where it's like, well, what do I talk about? Like, damn it, there's already a podcast about going from the east to the west to hunt. And it's like, oh, he took my idea. And it's
Mm-hmm.
like, well, that's no excuse to not just start, you know?
Yep.
And so I I just finally bit the bullet in early 2019, and just decided that I'm going to buy a used laptop. I'm going to buy some good recording gear, and I'm going to hit the record button and just start talking,
Mm-hmm.
and then put it out there. And it was a process. I mean, Bo was nice enough to give me some pointers. But I had to learn a lot of stuff on my own. I had to
Yep.
figure out how to, the first we were talking about editing and stuff. The first podcast, I think it took me like 4.5 hours to edit it and to get it loaded up onto like Libsyn or whatever, and like get it out into to schedule it, and my, copy my RSS feed to, so all these other podcast places, like, how the hell, and I don't even know. And I got really frustrated, like, right off the get-go, because I'm like, I got no one to help me. But it's like, you got to figure it out. And then I did.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's like, Jesus, I can record 4 podcasts and upload all of them in 4 hours. You know what I mean? It's just a process. So really the big thing is just doing it. Just start. Yep. You know what I mean? And it sounds cliche because I hear a lot of guys say it, but it is true. Just start and then stay consistent. Just stick with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something like you said, I totally agree. I just was like, I've been listening to these podcasts, and with my work, I have headphones in all day. So on top of working, I'm getting 40 plus hours a week of just knowledge growing and understanding, like literally it's nonstop. So, and having that, I was like, I feel like I could do this. And because same with you, like the whole forging roots thing and what it is, like my whole lane's not necessarily just all hunting and all that, but the whole concept was during COVID, there was nothing to do. And I was kind of like everybody else in the world at that time. Like, okay, well, who am I? Like, what's making up who I am, and what do I really want to do with my life? And the whole point is to just, of this concept is forging obviously is creating, and your roots are what make up who you are. So why can't I create that for myself and go out there, explore, talk to people from all different walks, whether right now it just happens to be, I have a lot of hunting guests on. I've had my buddy that does biking, triathlons and all that, and exploring that world. But you're right. Just throwing yourself into it and starting that first one. I don't know about you, but that first time starting the podcast, I hit record. I'm like, I sat in front of the camera. I'm like, welcome to the, nope, stop, record, stop. And just that initial, like, I'm well, this is kind of secrets out of the bag because I don't have a studio, and watching all the videos on how to make your audio sound really good and really crisp.
Yeah.
I go into the closet because it has all the shirts hanging up, shut the door, just chilling in there. But that's in the back of your mind thinking like, man, if only people knew right now I'm just chilling in my closet with the door shut, so it sounds good.
No, the thing about it is nobody gives a shit, about any, like, where you're recording, as long as you got 2 things. You've got listenable audio, and you're speaking your truth. You know what I mean? You're talking about something that people can relate to, and it literally sounds good in the headphones. Because you can I've listened to like podcasts like, oh, this guy's got this guest on, I can't wait, and then like the audio sucks, and you're just like, oh, I feel so bad for this guy because he's got like the dog barking in the back, or just he's on the phone and he's like, and he's just making all these terrible noises. You know what I mean? It happens. It does. I've had stuff like that happen too. But I'm, because I listen to podcasts a lot myself, I'm pretty aware of like what sounds good in my ears. So I just try to think about that. And then obviously, like you said, getting the intro down right. It's just a thing that comes with time, to where mine is what it is now. It's nothing really fancy. You know what I mean? It just, because I tried to do the same thing like like, how do I say hi to everybody? And now I'm just like, what is up, everybody? There's times I've opened up podcasts where I'm like eating some food or I'm taking a drink, or
It's
I'll be
real
like,
that way.
yeah, or I'll already be like halfway into a sentence and I've already hit record. And I'm just like, oh yeah, by the way, welcome to the Harvest Holiday Podcast.
Yep.
Like
Yep.
you'll hear me say things like, this is my show. I'll do whatever
Do
I
what
want.
Yep.
Yeah,
I've heard that.
yeah, it's just whatever. The cat just jumped on my shoulder, and I'm like, you know what I mean? Like crazy things have happened while I'm trying to record. I had Barklow on like a couple of weeks ago, John Barklow from Sitka, and like we got the video, like you and I are here, and
Yep.
like my cat like starts walking across the back of the couch, and he's like, "Is that your cat?" I'm like, "Yeah." And so she's like playing with something over here, and I'm trying not to like let her destroy my audio stuff, and it's just it's whatever. But again, I've gotten more comfortable with it because I don't try to perfect a crisp, clean. Not that I don't care about quality, but I don't try to manufacture anything. I just, like,
Right.
as cliche as this sounds, I'm just me, dude. Like I don't
Yep.
try to I don't try to eat pizza on the microphone all the time, but there's times where it's like, I've had guests on, it's like, like, what are you drinking, man? He's like, oh, I got me some bourbon in a glass. It's like, all right, let me take this headset off. I'll be right back.
Be right back.
If you're
Join ya.
drinking, I'm drinking. We're gonna do this
Right.
together. You know what I mean? So, and we have fun. I got a friend that's got a podcast, and she's like, were you clicking a pen in the background? She's a voice actor, so she's very
Okay.
cognizant of when she listens
Hearing
to my
that stuff.
podcast. She's like, were you clicking a pen when you're talking? So now I have no pens nearby. I try to, or if it is a pen, it's a pen that doesn't have a clicker on it, so because
Yep.
she's like, Jason, all you did was click your pen the whole time. I'm like, damn
That's
it.
funny.
You think about that. So it's little stuff like that you pick up and whatnot. But the big thing is really is having something that you're talking about, that you're passionate about, and people will hear that
Yep.
as you talk about it. You'll hear that you're being honest and open about those types of things, and that's how the following starts. Just that simple, really.
Yeah. How is like the following? I know that was something like trying to get guests on for
Mhm.
me at first, and reaching out to, like, I've got this whole list on my journal of guests that one day I'd like to check off out of the box and have on. And I'm sure probably similar to you, where you just like, well, I got nothing to lose. I'll DM them on Instagram, and either they're gonna see it or they don't,
Yeah.
and if not, whatever. And like John Barklow was the first one that, like, I reached out to a couple people, but he's the first one to ever answer back.
Yeah.
And he's like, yeah, of course. Yeah, I'd love to come on the podcast. It seems cool. And that was the first time I was like, wait, what? Like,
Yeah.
really? That it was that easy? Like, you're gonna come on and
Yeah.
talk with me, a random stranger? And I know same case for you,
Yeah.
going back and listening, that reached out to him. He's like, yeah, of course I'll come on. I actually listened to your gear review podcast. And it's like, but I don't have that many views. How did you listen to that? Like, it's crazy.
Yeah. It really is. Similar situation, in fact, in April of March of 29 or 2020, I'm sorry. COVID times, had some time off of work, and was getting ready to throw the towel in on this show. I'd done it for about a year. I was like 25 guests in, or 25 shows in, or something like that, in the low 20s. And I just wasn't feeling it anymore. I wasn't getting any traction. Like you said, followers. Doing a podcast is harder than what people think. Getting guests, being consistent, having a show that comes out every week at the same time on the same day, and having enough topic to keep the show rolling week after week after week is a lot more challenging than what people think. And then on top of that, trying to get guests that people want to listen to is hard, because everybody's got a podcast and everyone's bugging everybody to be on their show. So what was funny, I took some time off of work because of COVID, unpaid, and I sat down on the couch. I'm like, okay, if I'm going to do this, like you said, I'm going to write down a list, and I'm just going to reach out to everybody on that list. And so I sat on the couch, and I crafted very thoughtful invitations.
Yep.
I tried to add some value and just say, hey, I like what you do. I realize you're busy as well. I want to be respectful of your time, but I'm looking for 35 to 45 minutes to record a show on this topic. I'm flexible with your schedule, so let me know what works best for you, and I can work around it, and this and that. And I'll be damned if people didn't jump all over that. I got Ted Nugent,
Yep.
Uncle Ted, he jumped. He's like, yeah, why not? But I kind of had it in with that one just because he was I'd done some volunteer work for his Ted Nugent Camp for Kids, so that helped me out a little bit. But I still had to ask, right?
Yeah.
And I did it in a way that was respectful. Brian Call, who doesn't do a lot of other people's shows, but the reason he did do mine was because of the way I asked. It was he literally said the only reason I'm doing this is the way you reached out and was respectful about it. Same thing with Kip Folks he's the co-founder of Under Armour. He does not do a lot of podcasts and said the same thing. He's like, man, I saw your message and you were really kind about it and respectful about it. And he said, I appreciate that. So let's do it. So that's what got me in, not like, oh, you're a podcaster that's got all these followers and all this great content. I want to be on your show. It was more of, respect for that person, respect for their time, and like I said, the funny thing about getting Barklow on, and you probably heard this episode too, I had done some gear reviews on some Sitka for free. I just was like talking about base layers or whatever it was. And I just literally reading off the website off my phone as I'm talking about how I like their base layers and how they worked and how they were made. And like, as a new guy into this, trying to put my own 2 cents in. So when I reached out to him, he actually listened to the podcast first and was like, dude, I've already listened to your show. You got a good thing going. Let's do this. Ironically enough, the first 45 minutes we talked, we didn't even record. Come to find out, he's from Ohio. Obviously I am too. So we spent the first 45 minutes talking about walleye and like Ohio stuff and like whitetails and just like connecting on a level to where now it's like, if he stopped working for Sitka and I quit the podcast, he and I would still be very, very good friends. You know what I mean? Like he and I would still communicate on a daily. And it's like, I wouldn't have that if I didn't reach out, if I didn't try, but at the same time, you gotta, like I said, be respectful of people's time and, try to bring value. And, it's just kind of a mix of those, but at the end of the day, you still have to just, like you said, they can't tell you no if you don't ask, you know what I mean?
And so if they do, then, oh, well, you move on to the next one. It's not the end of the world. Like,
you try to turn a no into a maybe by saying, okay, he said no today. How about I reach back out to you in like 6 months? Would that be okay? You're getting ready to go on to this big hunt. And most guys are like, yeah, man, reach out. And some just aren't going to do the show. I mean, I've got a few that have told me they were going to do the show many times. And then it just, for whatever reason, it hasn't happened. And then that's all right too. It's just part of the game.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I appreciate you spending some time coming out here and jumping on the podcast with me. I know we had a little hiccup in the beginning with the time, but that's something, like we were talking about, you learn as you go. That's the first time for me, but I really, really enjoyed having you on here, and I'm definitely going to want to have you back at some point if you'd like that. But where can people reach out and find your podcast, find your page, kind of plug it, and of course I'll put it down below too, but just so people know.
Yeah. First of all, thanks again for having me on. I know we had some technical difficulties, and definitely be more than happy to come back on again as things progress. I know we really didn't talk too much about elk hunting or gear or kind of how maybe we should do another podcast that's specifically about my journey out west. I think that would be valuable to the people in your area, especially, well, it's our area, living in Northwest Ohio, Southeast Michigan. And I know there's a lot of guys just like you that want to go out on that hunt and they're absorbing that content. And, I'm not a know-it-all when it comes to Western elk hunting, but in the 4 years that I've been doing this, I've learned a lot of, through trial and error, lots of error. But the thing about me is I'm always upfront and honest about those errors, because I think in describing my faults and the things that I'm, my shortcomings, if you will, I think can help other people kind of flatten that curve a little bit. And that's important to me by, showing a little bit of humility and saying, hey, I made it 3 days and I quit and I came home and now I feel bad about it. Like, I'm trying to share that with people, because a lot of people like you go out there so focused on the romanticism about those types of hunts that it ends up being, way more than what they bargained for. And they, then they
Yep.
realize they just spent $2,000 on gear that they may never use again, because now they
Yep.
hate that, you know what I mean? When we could have taken some other steps. So yeah, I definitely think another show is in order at some point.
Yeah.
But again, if people want to follow my podcast, again, it's Harvest Holiday. It's all one word. Holiday is spelled with 2 L's. You can find it pretty much anywhere, iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, things like that. You can follow me on Instagram at Jason Holiday 545. Again, Holiday spelled with 2 L's. And I also have that's kind of my personal page. People are more welcome to follow that. But the Harvest Holiday Podcast page is just Harvest Holiday Podcast. That's usually every Tuesday. I try to kick out a show every Tuesday. And, like I said, people can find it there if they want to DM me, message, have questions or whatever. I'm on my phone way too much. So the chances of me getting back to you are probably really, really good. So yeah,
All right.
feel free to reach out, man.
Absolutely. Thanks again, Jason.
Yeah, no problem.